The blinking cursor on my screen froze, and so did my heart. In that moment, my entire livelihood hung in the balance as the Zoom call with my biggest potential client disappeared into the digital void. I'd spent 6 months courting this account, a $40,000 contract that would have secured my freelance business for the next year, only to watch it vanish, because someone in my neighborhood had decided my internet connection was an eyesore. My name is Henry Zimmerman, and until 3 months ago, I was just another work-from-home software consultant in the peaceful suburban development of Oak Ridge Estates in Naperville, Illinois. I never imagined I'd become the center of a criminal sabotage case that would make the local news and turn my quiet community upside down. It started with a letter. One of those official-looking envelopes with the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association logo embossed in the corner. I almost tossed it with the junk mail, but something told me to open it. "Dear Mr. Zimmerman," it read. "It has come to our attention that an unauthorized exterior installation has been made to your property at 472 Maple Lane. The visible internet cable running along your east exterior wall violates Covenant 7.3 regarding external modifications. Please remove this installation within 14 days or face a daily fine of $100. I sighed, running my hand through my hair. The cable in question had been installed by my internet service provider when I moved in 2 years ago. With the pandemic pushing everyone to remote work, I'd upgraded to a business-class fiber connection 6 months back. The technician had run a new line, but it was barely visible unless you were specifically looking for it. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter and was connected to Patricia Mills, our HOA president. "Mrs. Mills, this is Henry Zimmerman from Maple Lane. I received a notice about my internet cable." "Yes, Mr. Zimmerman. Several board members have noted the violation during our monthly property inspections." Her voice had that particular tone, sugary sweet with steel underneath. "The cable has been there for months. It's painted to match the house and barely visible. Visible enough for 3 separate board members to note it, Mr. Zimmerman. The covenants clearly state that all utility connections must be buried or concealed within approved conduits." I took a deep breath. "Look, I understand, but burying the line would cost over $1,000, and I'd need to get permits from the city. Could I request a variance or maybe install a decorative cover? The rules are quite clear. I suggest you contact your provider and have them properly install the line according to our community standards." When I explained that this would mean days without internet, which I relied on for my livelihood, Patricia's response was terse. "Perhaps you should have considered that before violating the covenants you agreed to when purchasing your home." I hung up, frustrated but not overly concerned. I figured I'd find a compromise, maybe get an extension based on my work situation. I even started researching decorative conduits that might satisfy the aesthetic requirements while protecting my connection. In hindsight, I should have taken it more seriously. A week later, I was preparing for the most important presentation of my year. Action Technologies was considering my proposal for a complete overhaul of their customer management system, a $40,000 contract that would cement my reputation in the industry. I'd spent weeks perfecting the demo, refining my pitch and anticipating every possible question. The morning of the call, I woke early, brewed strong coffee, and set up my home office for optimal professional appearance. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:30, I logged in early to test everything. The connection was perfect. My slides were ready. I even had a backup hotspot from my phone just in case. At 9:55, my doorbell rang. I ignored it, focusing on my mental preparation. It rang again, more insistently. Annoyed, I went to the door, finding a woman in a gray uniform standing there with a clipboard. "Mr. Zimmerman, I'm from Midwest Internet. I need to temporarily disconnect your service for compliance work." I stared at her in disbelief. "What?" "I have an important business call starting in 5 minutes. I can't lose service right now." She looked apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, sir. We received an urgent compliance order from your HOA regarding improper installation. It's been escalated as a safety concern requiring immediate attention." Safety concern? It's a fiber optic cable running along my wall. How is that a safety issue? "Sir, I'm just following the work order. It says the current installation violates building codes and presents a hazard." This is absurd. "I have a critical business meeting. I understand your frustration, but I need to disconnect the service now. Once the proper permits are secured and a compliant installation is scheduled, we can restore your connection." I was frantic. "Can you wait just 1 hour, please?" "This call is worth tens of thousands of dollars to me." She hesitated, looking at her tablet. "I'm sorry, I can't. The work order is flagged as critical priority and I could lose my job if I don't complete it immediately." Before I could protest further, she moved to the utility box at the side of my house. Within minutes, my internet was gone. My backup hotspot, which shared the same tower as my home internet, suddenly showed no service as well. I later discovered that the HOA had somehow managed to get both my landline and wireless services suspended simultaneously, something that should have been impossible without my permission. I rushed to my computer, desperately trying to reconnect to the Zoom call via any means possible. Nothing worked. In panic, I grabbed my car keys, thinking I might reach a coffee shop in time, but realized the action executives were already waiting in the virtual meeting room. By the time I could get anywhere with Wi-Fi, they would be gone. I called the client's number from my cell phone, which thankfully still had voice service, though no data. After several transfers, I reached the decision-maker's voicemail, where I left a desperate explanation about technical difficulties and begged for a rescheduled opportunity. They never called back. 2 days later, I received a polite email informing me that they had moved forward with another consultant whose reliability better matched their enterprise needs. Just like that, $40,000 vanished, but that was just the beginning of my nightmare. After the failed meeting, I drove directly to the HOA office, located in our community clubhouse. Patricia Mills was there, arranging flowers in the lobby as if she hadn't just torpedoed my livelihood. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "You had my internet disconnected without warning during a critical business meeting." Patricia looked up, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Mr. Zimmerman, please watch your language. This is a community space." "I don't care, you just cost me a $40,000 contract." "Do you understand what you've done?" She straightened, smoothing her cardigan. "I understand that you received written notice about a covenant violation and failed to address it within the specified time frame. The deadline hadn't even passed. Your letter said I had 14 days. "Yes, but upon further inspection, the board determined that your installation presented an immediate safety hazard that required expedited action under Section 12.4 of the covenant." I was dumbfounded. Safety hazard. It's a fiber optic cable secured to the wall. What possible hazard could it present? Patricia produced a folder and removed what looked like an official report. Our safety consultant noted that the exterior cable could pose a fire risk if improperly shielded from the elements. Additionally, its positioning near the electrical meter violated National Electrical Code clearance requirements. That's complete nonsense. The cable was installed by licensed professionals according to all applicable codes. Nevertheless, Mr. Zimmerman, the board acted within its authority to protect the community. I suggest you focus your energy on bringing your property into compliance rather than blaming others for your business difficulties. I wanted to scream, but I knew it wouldn't help. Instead, I took a deep breath. Who authorized this emergency disconnection? I want to see the board minutes and the vote. That information is confidential. Board deliberations on compliance matters are not public record. I'm a homeowner. I have a right to know how decisions affecting my property are made. Patricia's smile never wavered. You're welcome to submit a formal information request, which the board will consider at our next monthly meeting. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. As I drove home, my anger gave way to something more calculated. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA enforcing petty rules. Something felt deliberately targeted and malicious. The timing was too perfect, the execution too precise. I reached out to neighbors I knew well enough to trust. Robert Nguyen next door, a retired electrical engineer, examined the cable installation and confirmed what I already knew. There was no safety issue whatsoever. The cable was properly secured, weatherproofed, and well within code requirements for proximity to other utilities. "This is ridiculous," Robert said, shaking his head. "I've got the same setup on my house, but mine runs along the back where it's less visible. Someone's got it in for you, Henry." Another neighbor, Rachel O'Connor, who worked in real estate law, reviewed my HOA covenant. "They did technically have the authority to report a violation," she admitted, "but the procedure they followed was completely improper. They're required to give you notice and opportunity to remedy before taking action, except in true emergency situations, which this clearly wasn't." "Can I sue them?" I asked. Rachel hesitated. "HOAs have pretty strong legal protections in Illinois, but this goes beyond normal covenant enforcement. The fact that they interfered with your telecommunications service without proper notice might actually constitute criminal interference with business operations. Have you considered filing a police report?" I hadn't, but the idea took root. The next morning, I went to the Naperville Police Department and spoke with Officer James Morgan. He took my statement, but seemed skeptical. "HOA disputes are usually civil matters, Mr. Zimmerman. We don't typically get involved unless there's clear evidence of a crime. They deliberately cut off my telecommunications service without proper notice, causing me to lose a major contract. That's criminal sabotage and interference with business." Officer Morgan raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious allegation. Do you have evidence that their actions were deliberately timed to disrupt your business meeting?" I didn't, not yet. But I was determined to find it. Over the next few weeks, I documented everything. I requested all communications between the HOA and my internet provider. I filed formal information requests with the HOA board for all records related to my property. I even set up cameras around my house, concerned that this might escalate further. The HOA stonewalled me at every turn. My information requests were lost or delayed due to administrative backlogs. Board meetings were suddenly rescheduled without notice when I planned to attend. Patricia Mills avoided me entirely, directing all my inquiries to their attorney. Meanwhile, my internet remained disconnected. The provider claimed they couldn't restore service until I resolved the compliance issue with the HOA, and the HOA wouldn't approve any new installation plan I submitted. I was working from coffee shops and the public library, struggling to maintain my other clients. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Melissa Jenkins, a part-time administrative assistant at the HOA office who had recently been let go, reached out to me through a mutual friend. "I saw what they did to you," she told me when we met at a diner far from Oak Ridge Estates. "It wasn't random or by-the-book enforcement. Patricia had been watching your house for weeks." "Watching me? Why?" Melissa looked uncomfortable. "You know that empty lot at the end of your street, the one that backs up to the conservation area?" I nodded. It was the last undeveloped parcel in our otherwise fully built community. Patricia's son-in-law is a developer. They've been trying to get approval to build there, but they need easements from the properties along your row for additional utility access. "Everyone else on your street has agreed except you." "I never received any request for an easement," I said, confused. "That's because they never sent one. Patricia told the board she'd handle you differently after you missed a couple of HOA meetings where they discussed it. She said some people need to learn that being part of a community means making sacrifices." I felt cold anger settling in my stomach. So she deliberately sabotaged my business to what make me more cooperative, force me to sell. I don't know exactly what she intended, but I heard her on the phone with someone the day before your internet was cut. She said, he'll be more reasonable once he understands how vulnerable his work from home setup is. Then she laughed. Melissa pulled a USB drive from her purse. I made copies of some emails and board discussion records before I left. It's all in here, communications with your internet provider, where Patricia falsely claimed there was an urgent safety issue, internal messages about targeting your property, even notes about monitoring your work schedule to determine the optimal intervention time. I stared at the drive. This is criminal, I know, Melissa said quietly. That's why I got fired. I questioned the ethics of what they were doing, and suddenly my position was eliminated due to budget constraints. Be careful, Henry. Patricia has connections in this town and she doesn't like losing. Armed with Melissa's evidence, I returned to the police station. Officer Morgan was more attentive this time, especially when I mentioned the word conspiracy. We'll need to review these materials, he said, accepting the USB drive. If what you're saying is accurate, this goes beyond an HOA dispute. Deliberately interfering with telecommunications with intent to cause economic harm is a federal offense. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Detective Lisa Harper was assigned to my case and conducted a thorough investigation. She interviewed Melissa, subpoenaed records from the internet provider, and even brought Patricia Mills in for questioning. 3 weeks after my initial police report, Detective Harper called me into the station. "We've referred your case to the district attorney," she informed me. "Based on our investigation and the evidence you provided, they're pursuing charges against Patricia Mills and 2 other board members for criminal sabotage, conspiracy, and telecommunications fraud." I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by the reality that my financial situation was still precarious. The lost contract had put me in a difficult position, and new clients were hesitant to work with someone who couldn't guarantee reliable communications. "What happens now?" I asked. "The DA will present the case to a grand jury for indictment. If they proceed, there will be arraignments, pretrial motions, and eventually a trial unless they accept plea deals." "And my internet," Detective Harper smiled. "We've contacted your provider. With a police order, they should have your service restored by tomorrow, regardless of the HOA's objections." True to her word, my internet was reconnected the following day. I watched with satisfaction as 2 technicians installed a new connection, this time properly concealed in a code-compliant conduit under the supervision of a police officer who ensured no one from the HOA interfered. The news of Patricia's arrest sent shockwaves through Oak Ridge Estates. Many residents had their own stories of her tyrannical rule, though none as extreme as mine. An emergency meeting was called, and the remaining board members voted to remove Patricia and her allies from their positions pending the outcome of the criminal case. The new interim board, led by my neighbor Robert Nguyen, immediately began reviewing all recent enforcement actions and found numerous instances of selective enforcement and procedural violations. They issued a formal apology to me and offered to cover the costs of my internet reinstallation. 2 months after the incident, the district attorney's office contacted me. Patricia Mills, along with board treasurer Karen Thompson and secretary Walter Davis, had been indicted on multiple counts. The trial was set for early next year. "Your testimony will be crucial," Assistant DA Michael Reyes told me. "The evidence is strong, but the jury needs to understand the real-world impact of their actions." "I'll testify," I assured him. "People need to know that HOA power has limits." While waiting for the trial, I focused on rebuilding my business. Word of my situation had spread through professional networks, and surprisingly, it generated sympathy and support. A few colleagues referred clients my way, and slowly, my consultation schedule began to fill again. More unexpectedly, I received an email from James Whitaker, the CEO of Action Technologies, the company whose contract I had lost due to the internet sabotage. Mr. Zimmerman, I recently learned about the circumstances surrounding our missed meeting earlier this year. While we've already implemented another solution, we're expanding our digital transformation initiatives and could use someone with your expertise on a new project. Would you be interested in discussing this opportunity? It wasn't the same $40,000 contract I'd lost, but it was a chance to work with the client I'd targeted for so long. We scheduled a meeting, and this time, I took no chances. I conducted it from a colleague's office with redundant internet connections. The meeting went well, and Action offered me a consulting role on their new initiative, a $35,000 contract with potential for ongoing work. It wasn't a complete restoration of what I'd lost, but it was a significant step toward recovery. As the trial date approached, my attorney advised me on what to expect. The defense will try to minimize what happened, she warned. They'll claim it was just an unfortunate coincidence or a reasonable enforcement action that had unintended consequences. What about the emails showing they deliberately timed it to disrupt my business? Those are our strongest evidence. The defense has filed motions to exclude them, claiming they were obtained improperly, but the judge has already ruled they are admissible. The preliminary hearings were tense. Patricia Mills appeared in court looking nothing like the imperious HOA president I knew. Gone was the stern confidence, replaced by a meek demeanor and conservative attire clearly chosen to evoke sympathy. Her attorney argued that the HOA had acted within its authority to enforce community standards, and that any business impacts were regrettable but not intended. The prosecution countered with the email evidence showing clear intent to cause disruption and economic harm. The media picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle against HOA overreach. My case became a rallying point for property rights advocates and those who had suffered under excessive HOA enforcement. A week before the trial was set to begin, my attorney called with surprising news. The defendants want to discuss a plea arrangement. What kind of arrangement? They're offering to plead guilty to reduce charges of criminal mischief and improper interference with business operations. In exchange, they would serve no jail time but would be placed on probation, pay restitution for your economic losses, and be permanently barred from serving on any HOA board. I considered the offer. Part of me wanted the satisfaction of a full trial and maximum punishment. But another part recognized the practical benefits of a guaranteed outcome and faster resolution. What do you recommend? I asked. The plea guarantees you restitution and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. A trial could result in more severe penalties for them, but it also comes with risk and will drag this out for months. It's your decision, but I think the plea achieves your main goals. After careful consideration, I agreed to the plea arrangement. The following week, I sat in the courtroom as Patricia Mills, Karen Thompson, and Walter Davis stood before the judge and admitted their guilt. The defendants have pleaded guilty to deliberately interfering with Mr. Zimmerman's telecommunications service with the intent to cause economic harm, the judge stated for the record. This court views these actions with particular severity given the abuse of authority involved. Homeowners associations exist to protect community standards, not to wage personal vendettas against residents. The judge sentenced each defendant to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and joint responsibility for paying me $50,000 in restitution, the $40,000 contract value plus additional damages for my time and distress. Additionally, the court issued an injunction preventing all three from serving on any HOA board in Illinois for life and mandated ethics training for the entire Oak Ridge Estates board. As Patricia was led from the courtroom, she glanced at me briefly. There was no apology in her eyes, just cold resentment at being caught and held accountable. The aftermath transformed Oak Ridge Estates. The new board, officially elected after the interim period, implemented transparency measures and checks on enforcement powers. All violation notices now required review by multiple board members, and homeowners were given clearer appeal rights. I considered moving away, finding a neighborhood without an HOA entirely, but ultimately decided to stay. My experience had awakened a sense of civic responsibility I hadn't previously felt. I ran for a position on the new HOA board on a platform of fairness and reasonable enforcement, and to my surprise, I won by a significant margin. My first act as a board member was to propose a homeowner's Bill of Rights that codified due process protections and limited the board's emergency powers. It passed unanimously. 6 months after the court case concluded, my business was thriving again. The publicity from the case, while initially uncomfortable, had actually brought me new clients who appreciated my persistence and principled stand. The action project had expanded into an ongoing relationship, and my reputation in the industry was stronger than ever. One evening, as I sat on my patio enjoying the sunset, Robert Nguyen stopped by with a bottle of wine. "Celebrating?" I asked as he handed it to me. "In a way, you heard about Patricia." I shook my head. "She tried to move to Willow Creek Estates over in Aurora. Apparently, their HOA board does background checks now specifically looking for HOA-related offenses. She was rejected." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Karma comes around." "Indeed it does," Robert agreed. "You know, when you first moved in, I worried you might be one of those residents who never gets involved, just complains when things go wrong. I'm glad I was wrong about that." "So am I admitted. It took almost losing everything to realize that communities only work when people participate in good faith. We opened the wine and toasted to neighborhoods where rules existed to serve people, not control them. As night fell, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. One cable, one power-hungry HOA president, one lost contract, and a criminal case had completely reoriented my understanding of community and governance. The following week, I received the first restitution payment from Patricia and her co-defendants. I used part of it to establish a neighborhood legal defense fund for residents facing improper HOA enforcement not just in our community, but throughout Naperville. My story spread beyond local news, eventually catching the attention of state legislators. I was invited to testify before a committee considering reforms to HOA regulations in Illinois. Standing at the podium, I shared my experience and advocated for stronger oversight and homeowner protections. Homeowners associations serve an important purpose in maintaining community standards, I told the committee. But without proper checks and balances, they can become vehicles for petty tyranny and personal vendettas. My case demonstrates the real harm that can result when that power is abused. The committee seemed receptive, asking thoughtful questions about what safeguards might prevent similar situations. The resulting legislation, which passed 6 months later, established a state oversight board for HOAs, mandatory dispute resolution procedures, and strict limits on emergency powers. Back in Oak Ridge Estates, life had found a new normal. The trauma of losing my major contract and fighting for justice had faded, replaced by a sense of purpose and community engagement I'd never expected to find in suburban life. 1 year to the day after my internet was cut, I hosted a neighborhood gathering I jokingly called Connectivity Day. As residents mingled in my backyard, sharing stories and building relationships, I realized that the real connection that had been restored wasn't the fiber optic cable running to my house. It was the human connection between neighbors who had finally found their collective voice. The restitution money had helped me recover financially, but the true value came from the changes in our community. Transparency had replaced secrecy. Collaboration had replaced confrontation, and reasonable accommodation had replaced rigid enforcement. My business was now more resilient too. I'd invested in backup internet solutions, including a satellite connection that couldn't be easily disabled. I'd diversified my client base to reduce dependency on any single contract, and I'd built a network of colleagues who could provide workspace in an emergency. As twilight settled over the neighborhood gathering, Robert raised his glass in a toast. To Henry, who turned a personal injustice into community improvement. And to neighbors who look out for each other, I added, rather than looking for violations to report. Laughter rippled through the group, but there was truth beneath the humor. We'd learned the hard way that a community is more than its rules and restrictions, it's the people who inhabit it and the values they uphold. The last of Patricia's supporters on the board had quietly resigned, replaced by homeowners who understood that the purpose of an HOA is to enhance community living, not control every aspect of it. Our property values remained strong, our common areas well maintained, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. As my guests departed that evening, Rachel O'Connor lingered behind to help clean up. "You know," she said as we gathered empty plates, "I've been practicing real estate law for 15 years, and I've never seen a community transform like this one has. For better, I hope, definitely better. You've turned a cautionary tale into a success story." She paused, considering something. "Have you thought about writing this up? There are thousands of communities struggling with the same issues." I hadn't considered that, but the idea took root. Over the next few months, between client projects and board duties, I began documenting my experience and the lessons learned. The resulting guide, Balancing Community Standards and Homeowner Rights, was published online and shared widely among HOA reform advocates. The final chapter of my HOA saga came unexpectedly. Almost 2 years after the incident, I received an email from a producer at a national news magazine show interested in featuring my story in a segment on HOA abuses. At first, I hesitated. I had moved on from seeing myself as a victim and wasn't sure I wanted to revisit that narrative on national television. But after discussing it with fellow board members, I recognized the educational value such exposure might provide. The filming took place over 2 days, with interviews at my home and the community clubhouse. The producer was particularly interested in the transformation of our governance approach. "Most of these stories end with the homeowner either winning or losing a legal battle," she explained. "Yours is unique because you went from victim to reformer and actually changed the system from within." The segment aired on a Sunday evening. I watched nervously, surrounded by friends who had supported me through the ordeal. The story was presented fairly, highlighting both the outrageous abuse of power and the positive community reforms that resulted. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My email and social media accounts flooded with messages from homeowners across the country sharing similar experiences and asking for advice. HOA reform groups invited me to speak at their events. Legal aid organizations requested permission to use my case as a teaching example. In the midst of this attention, I received one message that stood out from the rest. It came through my website's contact form, anonymous but unmistakable in its source. "You may think you've won, but you've only made things harder for communities trying to maintain standards. Not every enforcement action is a power trip, and not every rule is tyranny. Some of us are just trying to protect our neighborhoods from decline and our investments from devaluation. Remember that when your property values start to fall, because nobody can enforce the covenants anymore." I recognized Patricia's voice in those words, even without her name attached. Rather than responding directly, I added a new section to my online guide addressing the legitimate purposes of community standards and the importance of balanced enforcement. Effective HOA governance isn't about choosing between rigid enforcement and no standards at all, I wrote. It's about finding the middle path where rules serve the community rather than the other way around. 3 years after that fateful day when my internet was cut, Oak Ridge Estates had become a model for HOA reform in our region. We maintained our property values and community aesthetics without resorting to punitive enforcement or selective targeting. Our meetings were well attended, with homeowners actively participating in decisions rather than simply receiving edicts from the board. The experience had transformed me as well. Beyond my consulting work, I had become an advocate for property rights and good governance, occasionally providing advice to other communities struggling with similar issues. The adversity that had nearly destroyed my business had ultimately led me to a broader purpose. On the anniversary of the court settlement, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a handcrafted plaque that read, "To Henry Zimmerman, who taught us that community is built on respect, not restrictions, from the grateful homeowners of Oak Ridge Estates." It wasn't as valuable as the contract I'd lost or the restitution I'd received, but somehow it meant more. I hung it in my home office, a reminder that sometimes our greatest challenges lead to our most meaningful contributions. My internet connection now runs through a properly installed conduit, compliant with all HOA standards and building codes. It's reliable, fast, and secure, much like our community governance has become. The cable that once divided us has, ironically, become a symbol of the connections we've built. As for Patricia Mills, I heard she eventually moved to a rural area outside HOA jurisdiction entirely. Sometimes, when dealing with a particularly challenging governance issue, I wonder what she would think of the community we've built in her absence, one where rules exist but don't rule, where standards are maintained without standardizing everyone, and where the focus remains on making Oak Ridge Estates a place people want to live, not just a place they're allowed to live if they follow every rule to the letter. The criminal case that once dominated my thoughts now feels like a distant chapter in a longer story, a necessary but painful transition to something better. The $40,000 contract that seemed so crucial at the time has been replaced by more diverse and ultimately more rewarding opportunities. And that visible internet cable that started it all. It's now properly concealed, but what it connects me to has never been more visible or valuable: a network of neighbors who understand that true community security comes not from controlling each other, but from supporting each other.